Hey, leader, and welcome to another episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I'm your host, and we recorded this episode live from our Burgo Realty Studios. Today, you're going to hear my conversation with Jeremy Pryor, who's the founder of Family Teams. He's been on the podcast 3 or 4 times, and I can just tell you this, that nobody has had a bigger impact on the way that Laura and I lead our family team than Jeremy and his organization. So always love getting to connect with him, and we cover so much in this episode. We talk about Sabbath dinners. We talk about how to create a ruling family. We talk about why Jeremy doesn't go to traditional worship services and what he does instead. And we also talk a lot about why we need a better strategy for discipleship in the church. And so I think you're going to love this conversation. Again, there's links to everything that we discuss in the show notes. Make sure you connect with Family Teams. Can't encourage you to do that enough. And with that being said, let's dive right in. Here's my conversation with Jeremy Pryor. Jeremy Pryor, welcome back to the podcast. I'm always looking forward to times where we can jump on together because I consume all of your content, and I'm always like, I need to ask Jeremy about this. I need to ask him about this. And so I look forward. I have a bunch of topics I want to dive into, but welcome back. What have you been up to?
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Doug. Thanks for having me back. Yeah. Life here is been awesome. We've got now our house has 4 generations living here, and we have 4 grandkids now. So 5 kids, 4 grandkids. Our third child, Sydney, she just had her first. So, yeah, that's been awesome. My 2 son-in-laws, they started a construction business together. So getting to do that. And then my son has just jumped over and started helping me in all things Family Teams and our nonprofit 1,000 Houses. So just really in that sweet spot right now where just like very much working together. My parents are still living and very much a part of our weekly rhythm. And so, yeah, I'm just really enjoying this season. It's been amazing.
I'm sure, you always encourage us to parent with the third generation in mind.
Yes.
And now that third generation's in your house, what is it like transitioning into, are you grandpa or papa? Do you have a papa name?
Yeah, we kind of went with the Hebrew because we knew no one else would pick that. So I'm officially Saba, and my wife is Safta. Yeah, that's how our grandkids call us. So Saba and Safta. Yeah, and it is awesome. I mean, having those 4 grandkids in that third generation, at this stage, and then my parents who are still very healthy and a part of our lives, seeing these great grandkids for them, and my wife's mom. Yeah, it's been amazing. So yeah, there's something that we really advocate for, and we've talked about this, is like this multi-generational family meal. And the way we break this down is if you ever get to a time in your season of your life where you get 3 generations around one table every week, 3 generations, one table every week, you transform your family into a multi-generational family. And that's what, we're all about. So yeah, we get to see that, in our case, it's 4 generations, one table every week. And when that 4th generation, showed up, my oldest daughter, when she had our grandson, Elijah, it was like winning the Super Bowl. I mean, it was so incredible to see that child, that, my first grandson, come in, and just for us to see, and for my parents and my mother-in-law to get to see that 4th generation. And then every single week to kind of reignite that excitement and just sense the depth of that meaning and get to see all those generational connections. It's the best.
Man, that's amazing. Yeah, we've been doing the 3 generations, one table every week, probably for the past 2 or 3 years at your recommendation. And it has been transforming for all of us. It's something we all look forward to. The conversations are so rich. It's unbelievable. I wanted to get into this a little later, but I guess I'll just throw this out there when we're talking about that dinner.
Yeah.
I'm reading a really interesting book right now. I don't know if you've read it. It's called The Gospel Comes with a House Key.
Oh, yes. Yep. Rosario Butterfield. Yep.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
So good.
The best books I've read. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm curious how you integrate neighbor into family. So, the whole idea is hospitality. Man, you should have an open door to your neighbors to love them well. How do you think that through in the lens of Family Teams and this whole generational meal weekly?
Yeah. I think that is the ultimate evangelism. And I think what Rosario Butterfield is saying in that book is right on. We have constantly tried to figure out ways to integrate others into our family. Tonight we have a big Sabbath. I think we have 16 people coming over.
Wow.
And probably at least 6 or 7 of those are not family members. This actually happened when our kids are pretty young. We started this multi-generational family meal. At the first, it was just the 2 generations, before my parents moved here. And we were constantly trying to practice the Sabbath, and it felt kind of chaotic. And we're like, oh man. But we went on a little retreat with some friends of ours. We were all kind of starting a church planting team. And one of the elements of the retreat was, let's go around and everybody share their 3 biggest spiritual milestones of their entire life. And so there's probably like 10 people there. And we went around, and I was shocked because everyone that wasn't a family member of our family that was at the retreat said that one of their top 3 biggest milestones of their entire spiritual life was experiencing a Sabbath dinner at our house.
Wow.
And I was like, we're just like trying to survive usually. Like, how do we cook this meal? How do we clean up? How do we, get through this? But it was very meaningful, and we experienced depth of meaning. And what they were articulating was we really saw what fatherhood is, sonship is, daughterhood is, which these are the essence, this, brother and sisterhood, the essence of what it means to be in the kingdom of God. God is a father. Jesus, is his favorite title for himself was the son. He says the church is like family, brothers and sisters. And I think that part of what hospitality allows you to do is actually make concrete all of these spiritual realities that we read about in the Bible. And if you don't have those experiences, if you don't have that table culture, that Abrahamic hospitality that, that is commanded of us in the book of Hebrews, like, go out there and make sure you practice hospitality in the way that Abraham did, because he entertained angels unaware. So we need to have that kind of experience. Like, let's keep our tables open. And that I think is the essence of what, not only evangelism, but also discipleship. Like, it's incredibly hopeful for people that are not believers to come into and see a functional family that loves each other. But for discipleship, it's like, man, to see, that's how a husband and wife, interact. This is how, like, we've all only ever grown up in one family or one kind of family usually. And so if we don't open our tables and open our doors, how does the next generation who may be coming into the kingdom, not having seen a lot of these things, how do they get to experience the kingdom and what it's like for them to become fathers and mothers and sons and daughters if they never see it? So yeah, we need to find ways to open our tables.
Yeah, and when you do them, I am curious, because there is a format to the way you guys have your Sabbath dinners. Do you just, regardless of who's coming over, do you just kind of go through the same thing, praying over your kids, blessing, all of those things, or do you change it up at all when neighbors are coming?
We try not to freak people out too much.
I'm like processing. I'm like, how would I do this, and how do I not? Yeah. So tell me what you've learned. Yeah.
It is interesting, and I think sometimes we've gone both ways on that. We've had conversations as a family. Okay, how much do we get into? So I'll just say our normal Shabbat, our normal Sabbath, like kind of liturgy rhythm is we talk about the importance of the Sabbath, what it means, and how it's centered on Christ. I always start there. So I share that like for 2 or 3 minutes. I have different ways, different quotes, or different parts of the Bible where I just want to make sure that our family takes a minute and just pauses and understands and experiences that shalom, right? That comes over you when you have a day of rest. And so it's a kickoff to our Sabbath day. So that's how it starts. We usually do that piece no matter what. If we have friends over or people that are neighbors, they know they're coming over to our Sabbath dinner. So hopefully, they can handle that. Then we light a candle. And the mom, the oldest mother in the house, lights a candle. This really helps her because she's oftentimes trying to rest in the same house where she does most of her work. It's like, how do I create that reminder? So she lights a candle. April usually says something around that, and then says Shabbat Shalom. Now we have a song that was really designed for little kids to sing Shabbat Shalom. That's one that sometimes I'm like, I don't know if we should sing the song.
I know the song. Yeah.
Yes.
That's funny.
So that's the decision. And then the last part of it for us is we bless the sons and daughters, and that's also, and sometimes the wives. And so there's a blessing we've written for sons. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh, which comes right out of the Bible. And then we've added, may he give you the faith of Abraham, the heart of David, and the righteousness of Christ as you build our family from generation to generation. Now that putting your hands, like my dad putting his hands on Elijah, his great grandson, and saying every week this blessing over him, may God make you like David and Abraham and Jesus as you build our family, because he's passing his blessing, all that he has accumulated in life, into that child. And the same thing happens with the daughters. May God make you like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. May he give you the faith of Ruth, the heart of Mary, the righteousness of Christ as you build our family from generation to generation. So most people can handle that. We do like to bless everyone. So everyone's a son or daughter at the Sabbath table. So that's something we want to be kind of careful of. Now, we do try to practice other open supper opportunities. And so we for a long time we have a house church that would practice just literally a weekly open supper where you can invite anybody. Like literally we had people like inviting people at the grocery store or whatever. Hey, you want to come to dinner,
Oh, that's awesome.
And we're very, very like kind of missionally oriented in that meal to make sure that, it isn't something that is going to freak people out. This is just an opportunity for us to get to know our neighbors, get to know people in our lives. Now we're trying to transition to do that, something called summer suppers. So we discovered that part of what really causes, our culture is very uptight about this stuff. Like we're not used to being in people's houses. We're not used to being subjected to other people's cultures. And so oftentimes there is a hesitation that, oh, wow, what am I getting into here? Somebody just says something religious, like that's so weird. And so what we try to do to try to bridge that gap is in the summer, you can do things. We have a huge front porch and a nice like yard in the front of our house. That's a lot less intimidating. Just come on our front porch. We're going to like chill out and experience a meal together and kind of try to bridge that gap. Now, once you're like comfortable with us, you probably will be fine to come to a Sabbath dinner and see us do kind of a liturgy based on our faith. But I do want to be careful, especially with neighbors who you want to have a long-term relationship with, to not weird them out right away.
Yeah.
You want them to get to know you first. And that doesn't mean you want to hide anything, but you definitely want to like probably stair step, the experience a little bit so that you can preserve an opportunity to continue to have that relationship and talk about meaningful things.
Super helpful.
At Endosha, we help transform visions into results. What does that mean? We often work with companies who are doing amazing things that have incredible products and services, but fail to communicate what they do properly and market themselves effectively. We passionately serve entrepreneurs, business leaders, and visionaries to see what's in their heart and their visions for the future come to life. We do that by providing fractional marketing leadership and creative execution all in one. That's what we call VCMO. With VCMO, you get a marketing director and a team of creative professionals to help execute all of your marketing needs, all for one monthly cost. How do we do all this? We do it 3 ways. Number 1, we get your vision. We get excited about your mission and your trajectory as a company and come alongside to see you go further, faster. 2, we have a team of talented strategists and creatives to get all of the work done. And 3, we flat out work freaking hard for you and your company. Reach out today. Let's start a conversation.
Last thing on I just more coaching on the Sabbath dinners is, do you guys literally like not cook that day? I'm trying to figure out dinner because I still find myself, we do ours on Sundays.
Okay.
And so I still am finding myself cooking. Like I don't prep dinner the night before or anything like that, but I'm like, it would really be nice if I didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
Any quick, I'm sure it's a simple fix, but any advice there?
Yeah. I mean, part of it is, so we do a Friday night, and so it's not technically a rest until the sun sets on Friday night. That's like the typical kind of biblical, and there was evening and there was morning the first day, as it says in Genesis 1.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like to cook. I have a obsession with recipes where I can cook a delicious meal for 20 people in 20 minutes. Like I'm going to do that tonight. I'm going to make, a filet mignon with like herb butter, and I can do that in 20 minutes for 20 people. So there's just like I just enjoy that challenge. I know that doesn't sound exciting to some people.
I love it,
but I think getting around fire and meat to me is just like, okay, I'm in. I'll do something like that. So I've got probably like 10 recipes that I like to, and they all kind of fit that category. 20 minutes. And about 20-minute prep, sometimes 30 minutes, and I can cook for up to 20 people. So that has been really important to kind of crack that code. We did do like crock pots for a long time. We've tried lots of things to try to cook in advance. If you're doing it on Sunday afternoon where you're trying to be restful, that might make more sense, is to find those meals where you can, Saturday night kind of like put it together and just get to enjoy it. Like we study our Sabbath from that perspective. Like what's causing us to feel restful? What's causing the meaning to feel really deep and causes us to connect to, the purpose of this day? And so oftentimes what we will do is just experiment with things, try different things. And then as soon as you find something that really works, like, whoa, that kind of worked, like that recipe, that order of things, doing it at that time, that felt more restful. Well, you just want to make sure you repeat that. What we've noticed is a lot of people, they will do the experiments, but then they won't repeat what's working. So they'll be like, wow, I remember that one time it was really awesome. Yeah, like there were some variables that made it really awesome. You can do that every week. That's part of the cool thing about repeating a rhythm. So I think it's okay to say, look, we haven't figured this out yet, but let's keep trying things. But the important thing is pouring cement around the things that work, making sure that you repeat those things and that you capture the learnings.
Really, really good. So are we gonna get a family team cookbook soon?
I've thought about it. I'd love to.
Do it.
I feel a little intimidated because I definitely on the side of the cooking that I'm not obsessed with it being the most amazing meal you've ever had, because I am all about speed, but it does have to taste really good. Like I definitely care about that. But somebody who's spending 4 hours or I'm watching these cooking shows, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I do not have the patience to be. I'm not a chef. I'm not a Michelin. Like whatever those guys are doing, it blows my mind. But man, I do love the challenge of like lots of food quickly and it tastes great. Done. Let's figure that out.
Well, if you do write it, you at least have one customer. I'm in.
Awesome.
So if you don't follow Jeremy, all great content, family teams content, he's everywhere. But one area that I really appreciate is your writing. You write on Substack. And I know, are you in the middle of like publishing or writing your book? I know you published several chapters. What is the title called? Rolling in 5 Generations, or was that just an article?
Like the kind of the working title is The Ruling Household.
The Ruling Household.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about that because when I read the article, I mean, it just set vision for the next 100 years for our family. Can you talk about just that concept? What is the concept of a ruling family?
Yeah. So it starts in Genesis 1, and we get in Genesis 1 the preloaded family mission statement: to be fruitful, multiply, fill, subdue, and rule. And I began to realize that there's a sequence to that whole idea. There's a guy named Sean Morris who first pointed this out to me like 10 years ago. He's like, Jeremy, you become like, each of these is a step. And so I started studying it from that perspective. And I find, first of all, people are all the time asking, what is a family's mission? Like, and people are inventing, different family mission statements. We've got a family mission statement. Like, I think it's great to figure out what is the unique calling of your family so that you actually give your family something to cohere around and to aim at. However, it's important to first acknowledge that the family comes preloaded with a mission statement. Like God, when he created the first family, he told us why he did it. Like he had created a garden. He wanted to create these creatures who would steward the garden, to keep it, to guard it, but also to expand it so that it's his presence, the order and the beauty of that garden would extend throughout the earth. Well, this is not something that one generation can do. And so he decided to create a family, and he gave them this blessing. It says in Genesis 1:28, he blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over creation. And so this 5-part mission, I think, is really, really important that we take very seriously. To be fruitful is the command to have children. To multiply is the command to have grandchildren. And so that there's a big mandate there that I think often violates the way we think about family as being a one generation kind of thing. Like, well, what do I have to say to my kids about their kids? Well, I think it's really important to create the kind of family culture where your kids want to have kids. And this is what you were mentioning, like aim at the 3rd generation. So be fruitful, multiply, right? Then he says to fill the earth and subdue it. And so to fill oftentimes is to actually identify the geographical area that our family is called to and to find ways that we want to fill that out. Not just to fill, but also to subdue, to take positions of influence. That could be in business or in ministry. And so we want to make sure that is happening, that there's a subduing happening, that we're using our God-given talents to make sure that we're maximizing whatever it is we can to bring the kingdom of God to earth in and through the family. But the purpose of all of this, of course, is this final step, and that is to rule. And that's God created families to rule over creation. And I think it's really important that we create ruling households. And this was very normal, historically, and it's kind of odd today because when we think about even any project that is going to require a lot of effort, we think, well, we got to start a 501c3, we got to spin up a church, we got to create a business, we got to, and so we don't think about families as being kind of productive entities any longer. We sort of think about families as almost like recreation entities where we come back together, kind of have some fun, create some connection, and then we all go off into our individual lives. That's an extraordinarily new idea. And it makes sense of why families that think that way, cultures that have that idea of family, tend to have a really high divorce rate, because it's a very fragile thing, these 1 or 2 generation families. So that's the mission we take very seriously. Like, our job is to create this ruling household. We've been fruitful to the extent that we can. We had 5 children. Our children really are and believe in having children themselves, and so we've got now 4 grandchildren, and God willing, we'll have many more. And then this just continues. Like, we've got to fill, subdue, and rule. And so this mission we want to take and absorb as a family, and be working together. The resources of the family, the ministries of our family, the business entities of the family, it needs to all be in service of this 5-part mission.
Yeah, I love that. And really, I mean, the vision that really grasps me too is just like, hey, if you do this right, so like, imagine if your whole family, how many descendants you'd have 5 generations from now, intentionally pursuing this family theme on mission. And not only that, but even in their own vocations and callings in the world, the impact that you can make in a community, in a city, a state, and maybe even the U.S. or the world. Any thoughts on that? Just because that vision always fires me up.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can think about, like, in our generation, so you got 5 kids. If our kids had 5 kids, that's 25 kids. If those 25 kids had 5 kids, you're now talking over 100 descendants just in 3 generations, and then 2 more generations. That's over 3,000 descendants in 5 generations. And this is really important to think about what that could mean. And if you are aiming at ruling, if you do want to make sure that, hey, and ruling, of course, in the biblical sense, is really an act of service. It's ministry to that community. We need ruling households. We need people who know how to rule with wisdom and justice, who aren't afraid to stand alone and to stand for what's right. And a lot of times, the reason why we don't do that, the other option is to have a sort of professional political class. And what they actually care about is, of course, popularity, because they have no actual basis from which to fall back on if they lose their popularity. And so we need to create, if you want a culture to thrive, you got to have wisdom in ruling. And so part of what we want to do as a family is create the kind of strength so that maybe my grandson or great grandson or somebody in future generations can start to invest their branch of the family into a ruling household, and we can work together to try to help that person. Again, not to get, and I think so backwards about this, not to get unusual advantages and privileges at the expense of other families. Like, ruling at that point is like, you guys, we've got a lot going on here. And one of my favorite examples of this in history was Teddy Roosevelt. The Roosevelt's a really interesting family. And part of what, like, if you read his biography, he was, their family was in Manhattan, around the 1600s. I mean, they had spent many generations. And Teddy Roosevelt's biggest hero in his whole life was his dad. And part of what he experienced was there was enormous corruption in New York at the time. I mean, it's hard to even imagine how incredibly corrupt the political machine was in that city and in that state. And Teddy Roosevelt sort of single-handedly started to destroy it from the position of a ruling family. Like, he had, for several hundred years, they've been building this family, and they were wealthy. They were a very strong family. They had incredibly deep roots, a lot of strong identity, but that really allowed him to stand alone. There were these moments in the state legislature in Albany where Teddy Roosevelt was just constantly fighting. There was just grift everywhere. People were like, well, we'll just take 5 cents from every person this way and 10 cents, and he would go and discover that and just expose it. People like, they're constantly trying to buy him off and say, hey, like, you can be a part of this. Like, he's like, I don't care. I don't care about your money. You are robbing the people, and that kind of ruling requires often that there be a family that is impossible to buy off. And if you don't do that, you end up with an entire society where you're ruled by corrupt people who are just at the whim of whoever can bribe them. And there's whole cultures based on a governance of bribery because the family has broken down. And so we talk about a ruling household. It's to create noble men who have the capacity to rule without constantly being corrupted because they're in these very fragile 1-generation families, and they really feel like they have to grasp for something because their identity is so fragile.
So good. I remember in one of our earlier conversations, something you said that really impacted me. I think I asked you, I heard about like Kevin O'Leary on Shark Tank.
Yeah.
He was talking about his generational wealth, and he's basically like, yeah, like after my kids turn 18, they get nothing. I'll pay for them to go to college, but they need to figure it out on their own. And then I look at Dave Ramsey's model where he's really empowering his kids. And you basically just said, why, if you and your generation have an opportunity to become financially, well off and actually put your position in a family to rule and reign over the next few generations, why would you stop that?
Right.
So can you just talk about that? The other thing that I saw you posted that really impacted me was it was a video on how you can actually enable a mom that wants to stay at home with her children. And basically it was this guy said that, I don't know if he heard about someone that wanted to stay home but couldn't because of their financial situation, and her dad was an investment banker, and he called the investment banker and he's like, hey, why don't I tell you about the best investment you could ever make in your life? And the guy's like, what? And he said, pay for your daughter to stay home.
That's right.
And because of his generational wealth, he was able to do that. And what a gift. And that actually gave vision to my wife and I. Was like, can you imagine being able to do that for the next generation of the Smith team? Can you just talk about setting up your family to rule and reign, what that looks like?
Yeah, a lot of this does come down to, do you believe in the generational connections? And we have kind of a weird relationship with this idea in our culture because we don't believe in multi-generational family, because most of us did not inherit a lot of resources from our parents and then that we're stewarding that might go back 5, 10, 20 generations. We kind of see ourselves as sort of self-made, right? And each of us that have been somewhat successful. And then what we don't want to do is rob our children's ability to become self-made. And so we want to be careful to not give them anything so that they get to start from scratch and have this great experience. And this is a very unusual and very recent idea that has emerged in a very particular place and through a particular group of circumstances. I mean, if you look at the idea that you can sort of cut your kids off from any resources and they're going to thrive and survive and maybe even do better because you've not, sort of given them any resources. That idea does work in a tiny circumstances. For example, from 1945 to 1960, after America won World War II, the rest of the world was so devastated. And we became this incredible manufacturing superpower. And we were like the last like developed functioning society. And there was just so much wealth that the middle class just exploded. And for some reason, in those little 15 years, it erased everything that had happened for thousands of generations before that. And we just reset our whole expectation of what it means to start a family. It's like, oh yeah, anybody can do that. You can just have one income and, get a job at the manufacturing plant down the street and provide for your family for the rest of their lives. I did it. Why can't you do it? Well, that's incredibly unfortunate. I mean, this kind of just weird, like historical amnesia that this is just not the way the world works. Like, this is not the way that most people that kick their kids out at 18 and say, good luck. I'm basically giving you a gift. You do your best. That would have been a death sentence in most cultures and most times in history. Like, you don't do that to your children. This is why in the prodigal son story, it was like such a weird thing for the son to leave. Of course, he didn't leave with nothing. I mean, he left with the inheritance of his father, but he did end up starving regardless. But this is what life is like in most parts in the world. And I think there's a generation that's coming that's potentially going to actually have a similar struggle. And so what we need to do is figure out, how do you bless your children without hurting them? How do you make that your success, your resources? Do you wait until you die and they're 55 years old and they suddenly get hit with an inheritance that, maybe they don't even need at that point? Or do you find a wise way to like distribute resources to your children to really help them? And in our case, we've created a family bank that basically there's 3 ways you can tap the family bank. One is that we'll give you a 50%, like basically a 50-50 grant for educational expenses. Number 2, we'll give you a 50-50 grant for a business startup. And number 3, we'll give you a 50-50 grant for anything that's blocking you from having more children. So, because that's part of our mission. Fruitful and multiply. And so we want our kids to have kids early and often. And that's a huge part of our family mission. All of our kids are excited to do that. We don't wield authority over the next generation, but we do steward the resources of the family. Like, me and April have an outsized influence over the resources of the family. And I'm saying that intentionally. It's the family's resources, right? It's not just my resources. God's entrusted that to us to steward, right? But part of that is to steward that not just on behalf of whatever I want to do with the money, but what is best for the family. And so we have the family bank. We can also give a 0% loan for those 3 things if they can't afford to match. But we really want to make sure that our kids are getting the education, starting the businesses, and having children in a way that allows them to really thrive. I think the other part of this that is really important is that April and I intentionally set up our lifestyle in such a way that we could really help our kids with their kids. Like, we really want to be available to be able to provide, not just like basic childcare, but to be really engaged with our grandchildren. And our kids are also engaged with each other's nieces and nephews. And so we all live on the same street. My daughter lives across the street. My other two married kids live in our house. We have a kind of a 4-family house. And so this allows us to constantly be helping each other. And for some reason, we think that success is every single person needs to kind of split up and try to somehow survive in a totally isolated environment. And this is why just sort of the weird myth of the 1950s housewife as being kind of the normal way that successful or even a Christian family should look. Again, this is very strange. Like, most families lived tribally in most times in history, where they were sort of like constantly helping each other. I was reading an article recently. This woman that grew up in Uganda got very successful, moved to Switzerland, and had her first child after she had gotten married. She said, I have no idea how people in Western cultures do this. I feel so alone. I'm just at home with this child. And so she's begging her husband, can we please move back to Uganda, where every single person in my family lives on the street? And so her husband is like,
Wow.
I think he's Swiss. He's like, oh my gosh, really? Like, you'd rather move to like an undeveloped country? We have all the resources right here at our disposal in Switzerland. So that he's like, we'll try it. And so then she wrote this entire article about what it was like to return to Uganda, live on a street that was just filled with aunts and uncles and cousins. And she's just like loving her life. And she's like, this makes sense of why, like, I'm a mother and how I can actually thrive as a mother in having lots of kids, because we live in a particular kind of lifestyle. Well, we've completely cut off this generation. And this oftentimes has happened, several generations ago, where we stopped thinking about how do we become interdependent with our larger extended family. We are constantly trying to find ways to become atomistic, individualistic, totally isolated. And as David Brooks says, when Americans become wealthy, they purchase loneliness. That is our goal. We are all trying so hard to make sure that we live the kind of lifestyle where we get to live and then die alone. And I'm like, we don't have to do this. Like, there's other ways to do family. And we want to kind of get the word out. Like, this is a strange idea. Let's go back to an ancient way of doing family where we are constantly helping each other.
Yeah, I was just talking with this young leader who worked at a prestigious club. I'll just leave it general, and basically was a general manager there. So he got to interact with 800 plus members of this wealthy place. And I said, man, what was it like? Like, what did you really learn interacting with all those families who are, really well off? And he basically just said, I think it's really important for you to know that you can have everything and not really have everything. And the translation is like, you can have everything and absolutely have nothing. And I feel like our culture is just pointing people there. And I said, how many people do you feel like actually had everything? And he said 5 out of 800 plus families that he actually looked at and was like, man, they're doing it right. So thank you. And again, that's why I think your work is so important with family teams. And if you're listening to this, and again, I've never been exposed to Jeremy's work or family teams, really encourage you. Again, they're the biggest impact on how Laura and I lead our family team. They have a website. They have a family team accelerator. Jeremy, I'd love for you to talk about that. And we're going to get into some other things. You also have Family Inc. Lots of ways for people to get connected around everything that you've been sharing. Anything you want to add there?
No, that's great. Yeah. Every family's journey is different. And we always just encourage people to start by just saying, hey, what kind of family do you want to build? Like, you've inherited a certain idea of family, this sort of springboard for individual success, or we kind of think of as the nest idea of family. You can choose to be a family team. But if you do that, oftentimes it's such a different way to think about family in a Western context that we wanted to create lots of tools for how to make that transition. And so that's what some of these different programs are there to do. We love getting to coach families to begin to transition from being a nest to a team. It's so much better. And so I just want to encourage people to do that, but it does then create a very different trajectory. And that's when people start to think about things like, well, maybe we should build a family business, family assets. Maybe we need to think about ministry in and through the home. And so that's part of what we really love coaching people as they begin to go deeper and deeper into living an integrated life with their family.
Love that. And we'll include links to everything in the show notes. I want to take a little bit of another journey with you. I have some more questions on family, but you wrote an article, I don't know, maybe a year ago the title was Why We Don't Go to Traditional Church Services. We Do This Instead. And again, I'm someone who I've worked at a church, very involved with the church, but man, I read that. I've probably read that thing like 100 times, and listen to the podcast that you and your wife did on it. I'm just curious, and again, I know you're not trying to sell anyone on that, but I'm just curious of how you actually view the church and how you all live that out and what you do instead. Can you kind of give people an overall summary, and then we can dive a little deeper into some of the things?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, so this is like a branch of theology called ecclesiology. This is like, what do you think the church is? And I'm very interested in this question. I also grew up, very much integrated with traditional churches, and I was on staff at 7 different churches. I've attended 5 different seminaries. I'm very interested in this question, and I've constantly tried and I see myself as like a second generation believer. In other words, my parents were very involved in church. Both my parents worked at a mega church. I grew up in a very churched kind of culture. And so I think oftentimes when you have that experience, you like, all right, there are some really amazing things about that experience. There's some things I'm reading in the Bible that don't seem totally to, connect with that experience. And so it's good to, as a second generation person, just really begin to ask, okay, what's the next step? I want my, just the same way that I want my ceiling to be my children's floor. Like, I feel like I need to continue to really lead our family into, okay, what are we missing here? Is there anything that we can do that might help us have an ecclesiology, an understanding of the church that's really that's even more rooted in what we read in the scriptures? And so that's just been a journey for our entire life as a family. And as we've really tried to run some experiments, some really didn't work well at all. I mean, this is not easy. I think it's for most families. I tell most families, hey, if you find a really great traditional church that's really creates great community, you're growing spiritually, like that's a gift. And I really encourage you to dig in there. But there are some of us who I think are kind of in this state where we're like, okay, there doesn't seem to be, is this really the way that the Bible describes it? Is there maybe some things that we can explore here? And so part of what we want to restore or consider is a few things that to me, I'm very convicted of, and that our family has really gone after. One is disciple making. Like I just really am frustrated when I see a thriving church where there's no real discipleship that's multiplying. And sometimes as I've talked to many pastors about this problem, oftentimes they're so burnt out in trying to pull off the worship service, small group ministries, that they just don't have anything left over, or their people don't have enough left over to actually make disciples who make disciples. There are churches that are exceptions to that. I love studying that. There's a couple of churches here in Cincinnati that have really pushed past this issue. And I just published on our podcast a friend of mine who's a pastor who's doing a fantastic job of leading his church into disciple making. These are often the exception. And so part of the reason why we want to do church in a more simple way is to just to create a lot more space for us to make disciples who make disciples. And so this is something our family is very committed to. We do this very intentionally. We have a whole program for how to make disciples who make disciples over at 1,000 Houses. And so that's one reason. Another thing that I'm very interested in is there something about the home itself, the relational connections between a mother and a father, the household, that is uniquely, can uniquely reflect the kingdom of God? Again, like around a table. Like when you think about how Jesus at the Last Supper, there was an experience of the table that was so beautiful. And when you walk into a church and you have that little, cup thing where you take communion, it's like the cellophane. And I'm just like, every time I look at that, I'm like, this is so odd. In some ways, like we know they had a love feast, but we know that's very difficult to experience the kind of meal that was happening in the first century when you're trying to do it at an industrial scale. And so sometimes I'm like, okay, do we lose something there by trying to run people through an experience of church that doesn't involve a meal, that doesn't involve, deep connections, relationships, doesn't happen, in and through houses. And so we have constantly been trying to figure out, are there elements, and there's ways to do this. I think the actually most healthy way I've ever seen is kind of a hybrid model where you have opportunities to really do this well in houses, but there's also times where you can experience the larger church, great worship, dynamic teaching. Like I really believe in both, but it is difficult because in the way that our current kind of churches tend to go, they really favor the bigger experience so much more than what's happening in the home, that oftentimes you don't see a lot of this vibrancy happen in the home. And probably the hardest thing for us that we've experienced is when you do try to put a lot of church activity on the family and in the house, oftentimes when you're talking about these modern Western families, they're not used to doing productive things as a couple and really hosting something that is that dynamic. And so part of why we even started family teams was out of a desire to see a different kind of family emerge that could actually reflect the kingdom culture in a home. And that's when we see families that know how to start businesses, that know how to host ministries, really awesome dynamic husband and wife teams whose kids are really on the team and are flourishing, and they're able to pull things off as a family team. Well, that kind of family actually can experience something closer to the first century idea of the household, the oikos that you read about in the New Testament. And we no longer have households in most Western contexts. And so I think this is why house church doesn't really work in most Western contexts. But if you do start to restore the household, I think you can restore an expression of the church in the home that I think is really healthy. Again, I think it still needs to be connected to something a little bit bigger. I think that's much, much better. If there's something like a city, even in the first century, they didn't just do house church. They did house church, but they also had a city church. It's very clear when Paul is saying that he was writing letters to the city churches, or Jesus in Revelation 1, 2, and 3, he's writing letters to the churches in the cities. Like these different, I believe in these three expressions of the church. There's the very local, small expression of the church that could happen in the household. There's the city church expression, and then there's the universal church. And each of those layers, I think, are really important to be connected to. And so we've really experimented with and have really tried to restore a more household expression of the church. But we also want to do that constantly in partnership with a larger city church expression. Sometimes that means, connecting with traditional churches that are friendly to the house church model that we're working on. Sometimes that means creating a larger network of house churches that can then gather together in a kind of a city church expression. So we've tried lots of those things, but we believe in each layer, and it's really important to have each of those experiences. But I do think it can be overly idealistic for a young family listening to this to say, we're going to launch restore a house church expression. It's hard work. It requires a certain maturity in terms of the household itself that is hosting that activity. But we are seeing a lot of these kinds of households begin to reemerge. And I do think it allows us to experience an expression of the church that is fairly ancient, but also very functional and I think really beautiful.
Yeah, you mentioned your passion for discipleship and that you rarely see that done well.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what have you seen work both in church and outside of church? And kind of give us that vision of what you're doing through 1,000 houses.
Yeah, so we've constantly studied this question, and the question is really simple, but very difficult to answer. The simple way to describe it is, does your disciple making make it to the fourth generation? So if you can trace a disciple, somebody you've discipled who's made a disciple, got to the fourth generation, there's almost no disciple making movements in the entire West that get to the fourth generation. I just had somebody on my podcast a couple of weeks ago who his full-time job is tracking and participating in disciple making movements all around the world, including in Western contexts. There's over 1,000 disciple making movements in non-Western countries that are getting to the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh generation. But I said, well, hey, could you just tell me, can you just give me one disciple making movement that's getting to the fourth generation in like a Western country? He's like, I don't think I can list one. And I'm like,
wow.
So that is appalling to me.
Yeah.
And so we decided to study this problem very, very get the microscope out and really study it for years. And we've tried. And so we are starting to see some of our disciple making efforts make it to the fourth generation. It's not anything I would call a movement at this point, but I do think the blueprint is working. And we've had to tweak. And it's really, I've really enjoyed this process. So what we do, just to kind of put it in a nutshell, is our coaching is that we take on groups of 3. So I'll take on 3 guys. My wife will take on 3 ladies, usually for about a 5-month. And we do a pretty intensive period. We take them away for a 24-hour getaway to kick off all the disciple making. Then during the 5 months of discipleship, there are 3 different kinds of kind of meetings I do with the guys I'm discipling, training meetings where I'm imparting very specific things to them as apprentices. We also do coaching meetings where I'm one-on-one with each of the guys trying to figure out, okay, what is something that I can really help you with? And then the third thing is a discovery Bible study around the person of Jesus, the teachings of Jesus, the life of Jesus, teaching them to obey everything Jesus commanded. And the fourth thing I would also add is that we try to find ways to integrate them into our normal life so they can see the way that we live. So we do that for 5 months. And then so they really get a DNA transfer during that kickoff and during those 5 months. Then at the very end, I then take them away for another 24-hour getaway. And at that getaway, we only focus on reproduction. So basically, I am helping them prepare to make disciples as soon as possible. And so by the time they're done with that getaway, they're like usually one click away from starting a group. They know exactly what they're going to teach. They know how they're going to do the getaways. Like they understand. And when I tell them, you got to do this for the people you're discipling, right? You got to give them, you also have to carve out some time for this send-off getaway to make sure that you are putting the seed in the fruit, right? So there is actual multiplication happening. And then we track and then we celebrate. So April and I actually are hosting a banquet in a couple of weeks where everyone we've discipled over the last couple of years is coming, and they're coming with the people that they've discipled. And so we have this all in a spread so we can literally see the ripple effects. I know for some people it sounds like a pyramid scheme. It's like, this is like multiplication. Like we absolutely need to track our fruit because this is not working, you guys.
Good.
This is a disaster. Jesus told us to do this, to make disciples who make disciples, and we're not doing it. So anyway, so it's working, and I'm very committed to this. So every 3 months we launch another cohort. It's called Life on Life Discipleship, over 1,000 houses. So anybody listening to this, if you guys want, it's free. I love coaching people. My wife and I do this personally. We will coach you in how to make disciples who make disciples. And so we usually coach about 20 or 30 families every 3 months. So if you're interested, please, sign up for that, because we would love to coach you. And we want you to develop a actual disciple making practice, right? We want you to experience what this is like. And then every year, and we say this in our community, our house church, basically one of the requirements is everyone has to either be discipled or make disciples on an annual basis. And so these 4 or 5 month, sometimes 6 month, like intensive discipleship groups that we launch, everyone has to do this at least once a year, right? And so pick the best 5 months of your year that you have the least going on, help each other. Sometimes a husband and wife have to do these in opposite, seasons in order to make sure that, that they're figuring out how to do this. Sometimes husbands and wives can do this together, but we've got to figure this out. We've got to stay dedicated, because this is what Jesus came to do, right? He came to launch a disciple-making movement. It's very clear when he left, he told them to go and make disciples. He said, I will build my church, but he told them, he commanded us, go and make disciples. We've really reversed that. We've said, well, we'll build the church. We think discipleship is just going to magically happen. And unfortunately, it doesn't happen that way. If you do make disciples, churches will happen. Like we can find ways the church emerges from good discipleship. But if you just plant churches, you won't necessarily be multiplying disciples. Oftentimes what happens is they're almost like nurseries where people stay spiritual babies. Like they don't actually mature. Maturity happens through life on life DNA transfer that happens in the process of apprenticeship. And so we want to make sure that discipleship is an actual apprenticeship experience, and that every person who comes in the kingdom of God should have multiple discipleship experiences with various people that help them mature all the way into the full stature of Christ. Like that's the vision that Jesus gave us. And we're just off mission. And so we really want to recapture that mission by giving people really practical ways to make disciples.
Yeah. And I'm I love this. I am curious, like I'm thinking about several people. Like, how do you find people to disciple, right? Like, do I just walk up to someone, 20-something, be like, hey, man, what's up? You look like you could use some discipleship. Come with me.
Yes.
Like, well, how have you, I'm just curious, how do you actually do that? Because I feel like a lot of believers want to make disciples. Yes. But again, it's just kind of like they hope it kind of happens and then nothing happens.
Right. There's like 5 or 6 major defeaters in our culture that make it really hard for us to do this. This is one of them. We have an obsession around expertise. And so we all feel like this, like imposter syndrome, like who am I to go up to somebody and say, hey, can I disciple you? It just feels like, what are you Jesus? Like, so this is really tough for us to figure out. So we oftentimes, first of all, say, look, this is very similar to becoming a parent. Like if you were to ask the question, who's the best person to raise my son in the whole city? It's probably not you, 25-year-old guy who just had a kid. Like it's probably somebody else, right?
Yeah.
My wife are joking, like, now that we've raised our 5 kids, now we feel, we're finally prepared to raise kids. But God decided to do this, to give broken and immature parents like us children to help us mature. And so we have to be okay with making disciples. And part of what I think creates a lot of the confidence is we really believe you give people what you have, not what you don't have. Part of what we do when we are coaching people to make disciples is we catalog the lessons that they're stewarding in their own lives and say, look, you should limit your discipleship to those lessons. And you can go into the Gospels and learn how to follow Jesus together. But there are things that the Holy Spirit has imparted to you. You're stewarding those things. You need to pass those on. And in terms of just finding people, I always think that people are usually like one relationship away from almost an infinite pipeline of people to disciple. We need to get a lot more connected to each other in the kingdom of God. We need to be like more parasitic. Like you need to go and attach yourself to a ministry that is like seeing new people come to faith. Because what happens in most cities is you have a ministry over here where there are new people coming to faith, but they have no one to disciple these new believers. You got all these believers over here that have been believers for 10, 20, 30 years that are all hanging out together, experiencing awesome, worship experiences or whatever, but they're like, no new believers are coming out. It's like, guys, look, like this is not rocket science. We got to get together. There's one kingdom, and the city church is something we have to honor. And so let's actually figure out ways for us to meet people who are connected to pipelines of new believers coming in. Now, there are ways to start your own pipeline, to participate in evangelism, to begin to find people that are definitely hungry and ready for discipleship. But in most cities, we just find it's sort of a networking problem. Like you got to connect yourself to those places where people are coming to faith and begin to serve those ministries. And as you do that, you will likely never lack for groups of people to come and disciple.
Yeah, and I'm curious, like just how you would explain differentiating this from small groups. I think a lot of churches would say that the small groups are the way they disciple people. They may have classes and things like that, but what's the differentiation between what you're talking about and just leading a small group with curriculum?
Yeah, unfortunately, small groups are almost the opposite of discipleship. Like the way the whole small group ministry whole idea started was we were very focused in the church growth world in how to create an amazing worship service. But there was a problem, back when I first started going to church when I was like a teenager, or a young adult, small groups were almost didn't even exist in churches. They had like Sunday night worship, Sunday morning worship, Wednesday night worship. But basically, after we started getting better and better at crafting worship services, there was a new problem that began to develop in the church, which was they called it the backdoor problem. And that what they discovered is if people do not form 2 or 3 meaningful relationships within 6 months, they'll leave the back door of your church. So you have this giant leaky bucket. And so the church growth people all got together and said, well, how do we stop this? And so they started looking around for, experiments that were working, and the churches that were initiating this new idea called small groups, they were closing the back door. And so this was the emergence of the small group ministry. And so it was really, and if you think about the best way to make sure people create a relational connection with people that are meeting maybe at the worship service or going to the same worship service, but need to experience relationship, you want to get them involved in peer groups. And so oftentimes you'll see like on a church's website, like, hey, we're kind of the young married small group, or, we're the whatever. So you meet peers and you get together and you form those relationships. And I think that's really valuable. Like it's great to develop good connections with people. You can do Bible studies with those people, but there's all kinds of differences between that and discipleship. So first of all, discipleship is, like I said, that's almost the opposite of that idea, where what you're always doing in discipleship is there's an apprentice and there's a clear disciple maker. And these people usually need to be 10 to 20 years apart in age. Like that's ideal, right? Jesus was older than the disciples for a reason. Like you need to have some life experience. Well, this requires that disciple maker to actually form a different kind of relationship. They're not trying to form a relationship with a group of people that are their age to try to develop a friendship. They're trying to develop a connection with people that are younger than them that need something that they have, and that is maturity. And so they need a way to deliver that. Now, the other problem that emerges with small groups versus disciple making is, okay, you got to create, disciple making is more designed to be intergenerational, where small groups tends to be life stage oriented. The other problem is that it immediately will burst outside of the realm of that small group because it's designed to multiply, right? So if you think about a multiplication movement, so you're discipling these 3 and then you've trained them up. Now they're discipling 3. Now they're discipling. Well, this immediately blasts way past not only the small group scope, but also the church's scope in terms of its own worship service. Like if you try to contain a disciple making movement in a small group, or try to even contain a disciple making movement in a particular expression of the church, like you're going to immediately throttle any ability for it to get to that fourth, fifth, sixth generation. Again, these are very different models of ministry. And so what we're describing, what we're having a conversation about right now, is the philosophy of ministry. And the Bible has a particular philosophy of ministry that is at odds with the way that we tend to do church in our context. And so one has to win out. And what we've decided over and over again is to double down on our particular philosophy of ministry at the expense of the way that the New Testament describes ministry. And so we need to be a lot more sensitive to these things. I understand why we do it. I mean, we've got so much invested in this model, but I really think it's important for some people to begin to take a step back and say, okay, are there ways either to tweak the model or to sort of begin to experiment with other ways to get back to a way of disciple making in particular? Because this is the part of it for me that is non-negotiable. Like, we have to make sure that in the kingdom of God, we are making disciples who make disciples. That's so clearly the mission that Jesus sent us on in Matthew 28. And so whatever we have to do to make sure that happens, we've got to be willing to do. And so, we can't just constantly be tweaking the different elements of our current model to see if they would somehow magically create the thing that Jesus commanded us to do. And I think we've tried that so many different ways. I like I said, there are people that I think are more committed to that effort and are attempting to do that. And I have a lot of desire to see them succeed. However, I think that we have to it starts with being realistic, that these are not the same thing. Like some of my friends who are pastors have had to come to this conclusion. Like the ones who are really successful at beginning to see disciple making movements happen, they are not trying to do it through small groups, and they are also not trying to do it in a way that's limited to their church. Because again, a movement cannot be constrained by those things. And so you have to be willing to be realistic about the tension between these philosophies.
Yeah. And if people are listening to this and fired up like I am, as you said, 1,000 Houses, is that where they can learn more about what you're doing? Yeah.
So 1,000 Houses, 1kh.org is where you could find us. And like I said, we have cohorts there for discipleship. And we'd be happy to engage churches in how to help them start a movement. Definitely take a listen to that podcast. My friend Chris Marlin, who's the pastor of the church here in Cincinnati, that's really going for it in discipleship. I also did another podcast with Matt Massey, who's a local megachurch pastor in Cincinnati, and he is really going for discipleship. So I am seeing some pastors get super serious about this. I've been so encouraged, and every time I can find one, I'm like, please, I want to talk to you. I want to share your message with more people, because I think we definitely don't want to say there's not multiple ways of doing this, but you do have to take the problem very seriously. Like, there's a reason why we can't find any movements that are consistently getting to the fourth generation in America. And we've got to fix that problem.
Yeah. I want to ask one more question before we start to get into Joe Rogan territory and go for hours. We'll have to do another show. But while we're talking about church and ministry, I lead I call it a pastormind group, but a bunch of ministry leaders. We meet once a month. We do life together, go on trips. It's been amazing. We've been meeting for 5 years. And part of the vision of why I started this group was when I was young in ministry, my pastor, and again, I don't know if this was like a factual stat, but it could have just been estimation, but he said, Doug, I think about 2% of Christian leaders actually like make it to their finish line intact, their families intact, and fulfilling what God called them to do. Mm-hmm. And whether the 2% is real or not, I know the number's not much higher, right? And so you wrote an article after a pastor fell, and I don't know if I wrote the name of it down. It said how to predict a Christian leader will fall. But this is huge because, when we gather together as a group every month, it's basically just a reminder of, hey guys, we're in this together. We're locking arms and like, man, let's do everything we can to make it there. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that article? And even I don't know if it was in seminary or in college, you had a professor throw out an interesting challenge in the beginning of the semester, but one, talk about the problem, but also what is your proposed solution? Because as you said, this just happens far too often and it's just so sad.
Yeah, it is really unfortunate. Yeah. I had this seminary prof who basically said, look, there are so many pastors falling right now. I'm going to basically issue a challenge that I'm going to begin every single one of our classes and describe to you a person who this week has fallen from ministry. And so for the entire semester, he came and he made good on that promise. And there were some famous moral failures from major pastors. This is back in the 90s. Man, I was so bummed. I mean, and this professor, he was sort of shell shocked, honestly. Like he wasn't gloating. he was in incredible grief. Like, what is going on? Why is this happening? And it is incredibly discouraging. And I do think it's important to have a thesis for why this keeps happening, because we need exactly what you said. We've got to increase the percentage of leaders who are making it to the finish line. But I do think there is something like really unfortunate about the way that we're propping up leaders to fail, that we're not creating, the kind of leadership culture within our churches that make it possible to attract the kinds of people who are going to be mature. We're so fixated on, okay, like we need a growing worship service, so we got to have a dynamic, charismatic speaker, and there's somebody who's very comfortable on the stage, somebody who's got a charismatic personality. Like these are the kinds of things for so many churches that become sort of front and center in terms of what they're looking for. And it's not surprising when you look at the kind of the personality profile that we are going for, that it's not the same as the person of character that is going to make it to the end of the finish line. And so this is part of why I think we have to take a step back and say, okay, have we sort of created a system? Like they always say that, your system is perfectly designed to give you the results that you're getting. And so I do think this is sort of a system-wide problem. When you design the entire system around creating a dynamic worship service, and that all hinges on this one particular kind of leader, that particular kind of leader is also very consistent with the kind of person who is likely to have these kinds of struggles. And so these things are interconnected. Again, it's not 100%. I mean, there's amazing leaders who have got incredible teaching and charismatic gifts that are very, very high character. But man, you're just creating this kind of unicorn expectation where it's just smaller and smaller and smaller percentages of people. And I'm just like, I don't think, like, again, we've got to, I'm in this second generation. I'm comfortable with taking a step back and saying, okay, I've seen a lot of the results. I've lived through so many of the challenges. My parents, they've, done a good job of like processing the challenges with their generation with me. And it is important for us to now take stock and say, okay, do we need to make some foundational shifts to how we think about ministry so that we don't continue to get the results we're getting? And so I'm on that train. I'm constantly asking those kinds of questions. I know that there's been a massive movement lately of people converting to, Catholicism and Orthodoxy, and just our frustration with kind of the typical Protestant, non-denominational evangelical experience. My bent is to kind of go back into these ancient roots as well. I just like going like a little bit further back, like into the Hebraic, into like the New Testament. Like what do we see there? And if we're doing some things that are consistent with the New Testament, why are we getting these results? But that's really not what's happening. Like we're oftentimes disrespecting the models that are being described in the New Testament that might have a lot to teach us.
That's so good. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I know we're running long, but thank you for everything you do. Anything else you want to share with us before we wrap up?
Man, it's been great. Yeah, I would love to get to talk, especially a discipleship conversation. Doug, thanks for opening that door.
Sure.
You can tell that's a huge passion for me and our whole family, and we want to help. So if people are listening to this and like, wow, like we'd love to check that out, please go to 1kh.org and jump into one of our cohorts, and we'd love to hear as well if you've got a model that's really working, and you want to share that with me. I'm constantly doing podcasts where I'm just doing deep dives into disciple making models. And if you're like, pulling your hair out saying, we've figured out how to make small groups, make disciples, talk to me. I'd love to hear it. Let me understand the model. Like, let me see what's working. But if not, please jump over and let's have these conversations. So yeah, thanks for opening those doors. I really am excited. I think we're going to find ways to really change the trajectory things are going on. I see a lot of great ministries that have made amazing strides. And so, I'm excited to participate in that and to celebrate that. But we got to stay focused on fixing this.
Yeah. Have you heard of Dave Buring before in Lion Chair?
No, I don't think I have.
Okay. He's somewhere. I think he's in Tennessee. Anyway, okay. I may end up connecting you. He's super passionate about discipleship. My good friend who's been on the podcast, Ken Chevalier, is the Steelers chaplain. He also is super passionate. So yeah, if you're always looking for connections and people who are doing it well, I think those two would be great.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll include links to everything. Thanks again, Jeremy. Always love doing this and look forward to the next time.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
Hey, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Jeremy. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. There are links to everything that we discussed in the show notes, so make sure you check those out and connect with everything that Jeremy is doing. I also want to give a special thanks to our sponsor, Andosha Marketing Solutions. They are the producers of this podcast, and if your organization needs marketing expertise, I wholeheartedly recommend their services. You can learn more about what they do at andosha.com. That's ANDOCIA.com. And as always, I like to end every episode with a quote, and I'll quote Jeremy Pryor himself today. He said this, he said, "Strong families are not built by accident. They are built by intentional rhythms, shared purpose, and spiritual leadership in the home." Could not agree more. That's going to wrap up today's episode. As always, remember, leaders, don't quit. Keep leading. The world desperately needs your leadership. I'll talk to you next episode.